seeking out image and identity does quickly lead you to the kind of the first entry levels of fashion. So, there are some very critical things that happen in the 70s, in my opinion. The blueprint of the now is without a doubt in the 70s. The first concert that I went to was in 1969, and I was 14, and I went to a Blind Faith concert in Manchester. And Blind Faith were one of the first supergroups, the first group formed by people who had kind of in a way made a name for themselves in other groups. But I didn't go to see Blind Faith. I went to see the person who was supporting Blind Faith, and he was a guy who had a single in the charts called Space Odyssey. So I went to see David Bowie supporting Blind Faith. So I went to see David Bowie. As a 14-year-old, I went to see David Bowie. Now, David Bowie is, without a doubt, the first really significant formative influence upon me and many people of my generation. David Bowie suggested, and certainly, post Space Oddity and when he kind of comes back as Ziggy,
creating an image.
Yeah, by which time I am, let's say, 72, I am 17. David Bowie puts to these younger teenagers the notion that you might be able to be something yourself, that you might actually be able to create an identity for yourself. Now, this was a relatively a very new idea for ordinary young people in ordinary parts of Britain. It was perhaps not exciting or not revelatory at all to privileged children from artistic families or wealth families or whatever, but to ordinary kids in ordinary homes at ordinary schools, the idea that you might actually create an identity for yourself that isn't given, that I'm not the world's most virtuoso rock player, so therefore I will be a rock god, I am not a great filmmaker, so that actually you could just invent something for yourself, that you could actually go to the vintage clothes shop or to the makeup or to the makeup table in your mum's bedroom or whatever, and actually invent an image. And this was like a major lesson from kind of Professor Bowie, and that actually not only might you need to invent one image, you might need, in the faster and faster times of pop, have to invent an evolving or different image, that you might have an image for a while, and then you might come back or reinvent yourself with another image. So this is critical.
But I don't understand, because it seems to me today, I get why that appealed to you as kind of 16, 17-year-old you.
Yeah.
But today it seems to me, just from conversations we've had in the past, I don't want to use something you said off camera against you, but things about authenticity are very important to you. I get that impression. So do you think that creating an identity kind of just through aesthetics, which is kind of what you're saying there, can ever be authentic?
So this kind of relates to something we mentioned earlier before we started the film. I was saying something earlier today about psychological fit. What's really difficult to imagine now in 2015, what's really difficult to imagine is a period or a socio-cultural moment 50 years ago where the notion of self-realization was foreign to most people. The idea that you might have somebody in you other than who your parents were is a quite modern, contemporary idea. When I was growing up, people still did, for the most part, what was expected of them. And, they had a bit of a kind of, rebellious time in their teens, and then they got their hair cut, bought a suit, married a man, whatever, and basically repeated in some way the life that their parents, grandparents, great-grandparents had before. Maybe just moving along a little bit to a bigger house, a better job, or something, a motor car. It was all very on rails. Life was on rails. I mean, one of the problems that we have, the kind of socio-political crisis at the moment, is that life is no longer on rails for anybody. And there are great sections of the community who don't know what to do with themselves when life is not on rails. And the state has not prepared them for the new, uncertain world that they find themselves in. So the idea that you might be somebody other than who your parents were was actually still a kind of breaking kind of idea in ordinary homes, 40 and 50 years ago, that there might be something to invent, that you might be gay. I mean, like, nobody wanted to countenance that you might want to go and live in a foreign country. This was a strange thing to do. My mother wasn't happy when I just went as far as London. So the notion of finding who we are and doing things that were really different to how we grew up, that is something we totally take for granted now. I mean, we're sitting in the most exclusive part of the West End of London, and there's half a dozen people here, and I bet nobody here was born around the corner. I bet none of you were born in Belgravia. And I would imagine that, some have come a little journey to here, and others in the room have come a very, very long way.
Like quite
in fact, as I drove myself here, and
this particular documentary, because it was John Waters talking over and some phone conversations with Andy Warhol, all talking about these like infamous tit prints. And I guess maybe as a woman, as a young woman, there is a sense of wanting to sort of not just reclaim your body, but it's used in so many ways by other people, and it's quite exciting to sort of figure out how you might want to manipulate or engage with your own body. And I think that was just quite a fun thing for us to do.
The way it was shot, the vantage point was quite difficult in the I guess if you're thinking about sort of feminist theory and Laura Mulvey's work about narrative cinema and the to be looked atness of women and the male gaze and all that, was that deliberate?
I don't think there was like. I mean, when I